In this episode, I get to speak with John McGlothin, a former Army paratrooper who currently works as a lawyer and writer. He provides practical and unique guidance on self-development to help people develop as the military helped him. Throughout our conversation, we unveil the importance of structure and mindset direction. Listen in for more. Before we get into this episode, we would like to thank our Season 4 sponsor, Affirm Investigative Solutions, your go-to litigation support company. Without them, we would not be able to keep upgrading and integrating new concepts to this growing podcast. If you would like to take your support further, feel free to hit the support button on our Let's Talk Paralegal website so we can continue providing quality and empowering content for you and all our listeners. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast. Today, I have the lovely John with us, and we are going to talk about a topic that maybe I don't really think we've touched upon on the podcast, and I don't think we've merged it quite often. We did have a guest that was a paralegal for the military, but we've never had one actually serve for our country. So thank you for that in advance. And John, without further ado, if you'd like to introduce yourself and really share a little bit of your story and how you got here today, because it's pretty interesting.
Well, sure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Name is John McGlothin, and I was a full-time soldier, not doing anything related to the law for 9 years. And then they passed the GI Bill, and I was like, well, if you're gonna pay for me to learn something, I will find something to learn. And I was like, I'll go to med school. And I looked up how long that was. And I was like, I'm going to law school. And, 3 years, luckily, the University of Virginia was nice enough to let me in despite my highly questionable undergrad GPA. And I graduated from there and have worked in various jobs, including back in the Army as part of the National Guard, the part-time Army, as a JAG officer. But I've also worked in other legal jobs that are not related to the military. And after a few years of that, I realized that there was lessons that I had learned in the military that were useful to folks anywhere, including the legal profession. And I wrote a book about that, which caused me to come on your show today.
I love it. And I've read the synopsis of the books, and I'm going to be quite open with the audience and with you. I have not read the book, but I have read the synopsis. I know it's located on Amazon, and Amazon loves to give you like a little synopsis. So, thank you, Amazon, for that. And no, we're not getting paid to promote Amazon. So. But I love the story, and I love what triggered it, which was a GI Bill, which it wasn't even like, this is my calling. But what I love most is what happened after that, right? Because you were telling me before our recording and in our, prep call, you were telling me about the journey that you went through when you actually joined the legal industry, right? And you were no longer a soldier, and you were practicing law, under the licensed attorney. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what's going on? What is this? What did I get myself into? And what can I do to fix it?
Yeah, it was a culture shock. And obviously there were a couple of changes I was making at the same time, but moving from outside the legal profession to into it was the biggest change, I think. Even bigger than I was stationed in Europe during my last full-time Army assignment, moved back to America, obviously went from being in the military to being only in part-time. But I think the move into the legal profession was a bigger culture shock than any of those, because my dad is a paralegal. So nothing more dangerous than knowing a little bit about something, right? So I thought I had an idea of what was going on, and that it was just a white collar workplace. There wasn't anything I really need to think about. You do your job, you show up on time, all the standard things for a job. I had no idea. So in 6 months, I went from being in an airborne infantry unit, like hardcore. I had a different job. I was a human intelligence guy. So it was my job to talk to people and find stuff out. And I went from that to being at a desk at law school in about a 6-month period. And I had not thought enough about law school culture, especially because I mentioned I was in Europe. I was the only person I knew applying to law school. So I didn't have peers that were applying. I wasn't on blogs or message boards or websites. When I went the first week at law school, and somebody said, how do you handle cold calls? We had a session with our peer advisors and students. And I'm like, we're going to get called by like salesmen? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean cold calls? I didn't even know what the term meant, more or less knowing the whole mythology that had grown up around it. And over the next 3 years, I learned a lot about the whole legal industry and the culture that has arisen totally by accident. Nobody planned this. Nobody sat around and thought this is how it should be. It just over time gradually became this sort of background culture that eventually kind of took over the foreground. And it was so much of a culture shock that I didn't do the best. I was way too judgmental coming out of the Army. I was like, y'all are weak. Y'all are complaining too much. Like, especially UVA is a really good law school. You got in there, you're set. Like, if you mess up life from that point onward, it's your fault. Right. I'm obviously excluding health problems and stuff like that, but career wise,
Right.
if you can't turn that into success, that's on you. But I was way too judgmental because what I realized was the legal profession was providing a technical education to people, but that was it. In the military, we had a culture of self-development, of an environment where you could become your best version of yourself. In the legal profession, people were on their own. And I realized over time, instead of just offering judgment to people and usually not accomplishing anything with that, that there was a better way for me to try to take these lessons I've learned and share them with other people, both in the legal profession and in general.
And I think that's so important, right? We miss the mark on that, and I often on the podcast, I say that I say this quite often, and probably my audience is sick of hearing me say this after 4 seasons, but I'm going to just continue to say it because it's very important, is law school doesn't teach you to be a business person, doesn't teach you how to cultivate relationships, create the customer experience, which is so important in order for you to continue and grow and prosper your law firm to begin with, right?
Hell, it barely teaches you the law. The law is, and that's not, I loved UVA. I had a great experience. I'm not shading my school or any school at all, but 3 years is not a lot. You don't, as you well know, and your audience knows, you don't pick a major. You don't get real into, tort law or any other, even, you don't even pick a broad category like that. You can just take whatever you want after your mandatory classes. So no, you're right. It doesn't offer anything beyond the bare minimum to get you out there and then to continue learning. But it doesn't necessarily, but people aren't in a learning environment after that. They have a job, they have stuff they have to do. So they can't necessarily devote the time and the energy to building the fundamentals when you got filing deadlines, you got things to do, you got people depending on you. So people are thrown out there in an environment where they're supposed to keep learning, but they have other obligations that make that really hard to do.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't prioritize that, right? We don't see that is a priority. Should be, we should make time to take time is always my motto. And, unfortunately, that's just not the lay of the land for the common societal norms, right? We're so constricted. And I love, I had a lot of people in my family, serve, and a lot of them are now, thankfully got back home safe and, are retired and, we're very blessed to have them back with us. But I love how you talked about the personal development, right? Which is not something that a lot of people, unless you go to the Army and are part of that, realm and that industry, I want to say, actually dabble with that, right? Because most of us have college degrees. Most of us have, Juris Masters or Juris Doctrines or doctrines degree, PhDs, whatever the case may be. And still, even my psychology majors out there that I have conversations with, my sociology, my degrees are in sociology and pre-law. Nowhere was I offered even an elective about personal or professional development, about finances, about managing a team, like none of that, right? Even my business majors are like, absolutely not. Like that was just unheard of. And then I could be wrong, and prove me if I am wrong, because I haven't been in school since 2000, and I have my degree right here, so I can tell you since 2011 is my last official college degree. I've had plenty of certifications after that, but we both know that that's not the same. And so, and I am going back for my master's now, actually in a couple of weeks, but
congrats.
Thank you. But it's still different, right? It's all virtual now. It's like a whole different world, and they're trying to adapt to this new, post-COVID normal trends. And again, I'm a people person. I would love to be in the same room with you right now, although you're in Washington, I'm in Florida, so that would be kind of difficult. But I just love to, be personable and be in the same room with people and just have conversations that are worth having outside the podcast. That's really the purpose of the podcast. And tell me your thoughts, right? Because this must have been a huge culture shock, because it was for me too. I was raised in Miami, which was like, it's the melting pot of the Americas. There's every culture you can possibly think of is in this county. Okay. There was, I would walk out the door and there was languages everywhere. Just nobody, everybody spoke English, but nobody spoke it. Like nobody was like, they all spoke their native language. They all had their own little communities. It's kind of like a New York borough kind of thing, right? From people people in New York out there.
Your own little grocery store you go to get the stuff
they're
you
all
need at
mama and
home.
papas, like you'll barely see a mainstream store over there. Everybody, that your neighbor owns, the shop or whatever it is to fix your car, whatever it is. So I grew up in that environment, right? My origins are from Puerto Rico, so that's very much cultural as well. And so you're right. When I went into the legal industry and I saw that culture, I was definitely culture shocked, and just as much as you were. And, that's really like after 15 years of being a paralegal, that's really what inspired me to open up my company and do what I do, right? Which is relieving the gap between the practicing of law, which is why they call it practice, right? Because we're practicing, and the actual education that you receive in order to prepare you for the practicing. So tell me a little bit about that.
Like you were saying, I like what you said about your background, because it's about community. And the legal community is only a community sometimes because they have something professional in common. And making a more meaningful connection than that can be hard. And that's where a lot of those lessons get taught, is in those other connections you make as part of a community. For example, this is a non-legal, non-military example, but I think you'll find it relevant. Hopefully your listeners will. I play soccer in 2 different ways right now. One is like the bougie social league, where you pay like $80 and you play like 7 games, and it's young professionals, right? Who may or may not know each other. Maybe they played together for a few seasons, but that's it, right? If they know each other, they know each other through the team. And people will get angry and people will be reckless. And like, sometimes they're just not very good at soccer or anything physical. And they'll sometimes, and some people will like, no, they don't get in like fights, but it'll be kind of dramatic. And the other type of soccer I play is pickup soccer. I'm half Hispanic. I was born in Texas. And could have easily been Martinez, as I am McGlothin. Just have, you get your dad's name is how it works. But the other soccer I play is with all Hispanic immigrants, mostly Central American dudes. Yes. And it is a community. Like, they bring food, their families come out, they play music. Like, and the reason I mention that is because the way they play on the field changes too, because you're going to see these people again. These are your friends. These are your neighbors. Like, these are people that are part of your community. So you're more invested in it. Whereas with the other league, it's just sort of, these are just people I see for this one specific thing. And maybe I get to know them, maybe I don't. It's whatever. And the legal profession can be too much like that, where I see people at work. Maybe I build a relationship, maybe I don't. But are you really part of the same community? It's really hit and miss. It's not impossible. I've seen places do it. But again, it's coincidence. Or maybe one organization works to make it that way, but it's not something that's more widely established, and it leaves a huge, huge gap. Without that sense of community, it's really hard to develop those things that make something really meaningful and allow you to develop things that will be lasting. Because if you want honest feedback from people, it's something I get into in the book. If you want honest feedback from people, they got to be invested in you. Otherwise, people are just going to say something nice so they can move on with their day, because they don't want drama. So they're just going to tell you whatever. And then when you're gone, they'll tell somebody else what they actually thought about what you did. But if you have that community, it's easier to get that honest feedback to build something over time that really benefits you and the people around you.
Yeah, I talk about that as well, especially when I do my consulting with law firms. We talk about building a community, right? Creating an environment where your employees and your clients and everyone that steps foot into whether it's a virtual law firm or not, but anybody that physically or virtually steps foot into your organization feels safe, feels comfortable, feels heard, and feels seen. We sometimes leave the human out of the human resource aspect of running a business. And it's unfortunate, right? It really is unfortunate, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. We're humans. We're not computers. No matter how much technology, software, AI we have implemented, automation, streamline. Trust me, I make my money off of, added doing processes and development. I understand the importance of it, but I also understand the importance about who's implementing those, right? Who are utilizing this? Who's actually communicating with the client when technology is failing you, or has missed the mark, or didn't send out the email that you thought was sent out, or who is actually picking up the slack when technology needs a reboot or an upgrade, right?
Being aware of the entirety of the roster of people you deal with. Yes. And not taking things for granted like that. And it's almost like, you don't have to be everybody's best friend. I'm not even advocating.
No.
One of the things the military is good about is like, maybe I get to 4 out of 10 with somebody, right? But I would have been 2 out of 10 with them before. So you get the best possible version of that relationship you have. Maybe it's still a little contentious. Maybe you still just have personalities that don't work together, but you find a way to make the best possible version of it. So you don't have to be everybody's best friend. You all have to go out together at happy hour every single day. Like sometimes people can think that because they're worried about having a community forced on them. It's like, no, it's a community that serves a purpose, but all you need to do is dip your toe in that water when you're working towards that purpose. You don't have to see these people at the bar or the club or the sports field or the picnic area or the grill or whatever. Like, but when you are working with them, you can take that same amount of time you're spending anyway and spend it in a way that creates something much more rewarding without having to spend a ton of extra time. It's a difference in approach and tone and attitude. It doesn't require you being best friends with everyone and investing a ton more time and energy.
Oh my God. I wish everybody was like that. I wish everybody had that mindset. That's half the battle when you're, in these conferences or conventions, especially speaking engagements. And I'm sure you know about this as well, because you do a lot of speaking engagements, especially promoting the book and everything. At speaking engagements, you get them all. You get it from all walks of life. It's a roll of a dice at that point. And most of them are legal professionals. Most of them are in the legal industry or vendors, right? Because those are the ones that mostly sponsor these types of events. So you get to, meet the court reporters of the world and the investigators and the software people I think you're right. I think there's just you're not going to get everybody's 10 or everybody's 100%, right? Because we're all in our own little worlds, right? Society has put us in these little boxes, has labeled us, right? I always call it the shipping method when they box you up and they ship you off and they put all these labels. And sometimes we carry those labels, right? Sometimes those labels hinder us from getting outside the box and, trying to meet somebody in their world, right? Crossing that bridge. I hate the saying of meeting people at the same level. Like, what does that mean? What level are we talking about? There is no
meet
level.
them where they're at. I mean, that was where I failed in law school. I said I came at it with judgment. So let me give a success story as an example.
Yes. Okay.
Instead of just like issues. The dean of UVA law when I was there was a prototypical dean of a law school, very cerebral, not the most like social guy. And had some kind of event we had to go to. I think it was like a first year student event. And he's going table to table. And I had a college football shirt on. This man could not have been less interested in college football, was at least the vibe I got. But he asked me a question about it. We talked about it a little bit. He made an effort to just in that moment connect with me. Now he didn't spend more time than he would have. He didn't spend more energy than he would have, but he made an effort to say, hey, this is who this person is. Let me engage with them on something they care about for this 15, 30 seconds I'm going to interact with them. And I still remember that because that's why he was dean of the law school, because he had that tool set. Even though he wasn't Mr. slap your back, shake your hand, shoot the shit with you type of guy, he was still the kind of person who can recognize that it mattered to meet people where they were at. So that I wanted to give an example, not just complain about,
no, we're not here to complain. We're here to give practical tips. And
exactly. And that was a way for him to connect with somebody who had a different personality, different background than he did. But he was, and like I said, that's why he was dean of the school. The man was not just smart in the academic sense, but he was savvy as well. And that's what it is, because it's that same interaction. We didn't have to become best friends. We didn't have beers together and talk about our, hardships or our feelings or whatever. Like, I barely talked to the man the rest of the time I was in law school. I might not have talked to him again, actually, outside of like a hello, but it showed that he cared and that he recognized that we weren't just there for that just for specific legal interactions, but that we were people behind it too. And again, you don't have to get into your feelings and sob in front of people in order to at least acknowledge that exists and it matters.
I love that. So let's get into the book. Let's dive in and let's talk a little bit about the book and take us through that journey as to your inspiration. And obviously you're passionate about it. We know that. We can tell throughout the, this podcast episode right here. But yeah, walk us through it. Tell us a little bit about it and really what initiated all of it.
So when you're in the Army, everybody you know is in the Army or is a family member of someone in the Army, right? You're at camp, whatever, fort, whatever. And even if you're having a good time, like I was stationed in Italy for my last active duty assignment. And when they're like, you have to leave Italy, I was like, how about I go to the National Guard? How about I leave the full-time Army? Because I'm not trying to live in the middle of nowhere again. Like I had it too good out here. So I didn't really appreciate what I had learned, right? I knew the literal things I'd learned. I'd learned Arabic, which I have mostly forgotten now. So don't ask me any questions about that, please. It's embarrassing. And then, so you learn technical skills and that sort of thing, but I hadn't realized that the underlying traits you learn about learning. And a lot of it's implied. A lot of it's the culture you're in. It's not a checklist. It's not a big, we got posters, we got motivational posters, don't get me wrong, but it's usually not written down. So only when I got out did I appreciate it. And then only after I'd spent some time out did I appreciate how to convey that to other people, because I didn't know what they hadn't learned, in addition to not realizing what I had, because I had a normal undergrad experience. Even though I enlisted, I didn't become an officer when I first joined the Army. I had gone to college first. So I got regular college experience, nothing military about it, didn't do ROTC, nothing. I joined after that. So, but that had been a minute. So I'd really forgotten what the average normal experience was like. So after a few years, I was like, I feel like I'm able to tackle these challenges. I feel like I'm able to get ahead of these problems. And obviously there's, it doesn't mean I don't have setbacks, doesn't mean I don't have frustrations, but I have pretty few of them compared to my peers. I saw people who were smart, who were social, who were good natured people, who meant well, who struggled way more than they should because they hadn't been taught these things. So I thought, okay, here's a gap I can try to fill. I look for other military books, and I love my fellow soldiers that write books, but a lot of these books basically tell you to pretend to be in the military to benefit from it. Like get up at 2 a.m., run 1,000,000 miles, like lift a car at lunchtime. Like in most people I saw, right? Most people I saw struggling, it was not lack of intensity, right? They cared. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that they didn't have the tools. They hadn't been given them, because schools have another job to do. Workplaces have another job literally to do. It's not that they don't care about you, but they just don't exist for these reasons. So I thought, here's a gap I can fill. So basically what I did with the book was I talk about why schools and jobs don't do this already, because hopefully people can understand a little more about the gap that exists, instead of I try not to just drop in with like, here's my story, I figured it all out. So I go in, I analyze why the gap exists. I get into a bunch of research, because the last thing I want to do was write a book that sucks, right? I'd rather just not write a book. I got other things I could do with my day. So went through the social research about these types of learning and these types of academic and workplace environments to make sure that my personal experience lined up with what was actually true, to the extent that its research has been done. So go through all that. And then I picked 5 traits that I thought best summarized the type of development you get in the military, specifically being a paratrooper like I was. It's a very particular kind of unit. 5 traits that develops that are uniquely developed there. I'm not saying it's the only place that you can get that development, but you're going to get it more often in a unique way at that unit. So I thought, because you got to make things approachable, right? My story is not I'm not the first guy on the moon, right? So you got to have a framework that will help people understand exactly how they can approach what you're telling them. So that's the way I did it. Pick 5 traits and then get into how people can get into the mindset that those traits represent, and then specific things they can do to help build those traits themselves.
I love it. And I love the concept. I love how you mixed your experience with the practicality of it all. I did something similar with my book, so I completely understand about the research and trying to create something, more interesting, other than here are my 5 tips. For that, I could just do, a video
just run
or a
mouth.
podcast.
Because even if you're right, there's only so far that can go, right? It's good to have some sort of stronger foundation to build.
Absolutely. And, utilizing, other platforms, right? Like I'm a big fan of the American Bar Association and their surveys and their facts, and, the good old Thomas Reuters of the world, and all the good stuff, right? There's always these go-to resources that we utilize, especially in the legal industry, for facts, right? And percentages and surveys. They've already done the research. Why do I need to read? I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here. It's just for, it's just for knowledge. It's just to share. I'm not making a career out of it, right? And I love that. I love that you did that and that you use that framework. So we have reached the end of our recording. But definitely, guys, if you want, you can reach out to John. We have all his information on the descriptions. We'll also have the link to his book in our description as well. And thank you so much for being on the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast. I totally appreciate you carving out some time for us and joining us and telling us about your journey and this amazing book.
It was a pleasure. Thank you again for having me. It was awesome.
Thank you.